Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, the podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 105.
Ben, my favorite thing that I discovered about 105 is that if you take 105 and flip it backwards, it's 501. And that's so perfect for us because this is season 5, episode 1 of the Bad at Magic podcast. We were renewed for another season, buddy.
Nice. We're starting our 5th year of podcasting. Well, listeners, if you've been with us a short time or a long time, welcome to the Bad at Magic podcast. We're glad to have you.
I don't normally do this, but I want to take a second to thank all the people that helped us get here. First of all, I got to thank you, Ben, my beloved co-host. That is the yin to my yang, the light to my dark, just the opposite half. I have to thank our executive staff, which is Alicia and Nicole, obviously. They could have shut us down several times to this point. I will say thank you to our editor, Jeremy. He does such a great job cutting out all of our nonsense. Our sound production team, Beth, Allen, they make us sound so good every couple of weeks. Social media coordinator, Elizabeth, she's fantastic keeping up with all of our fans. My vocal coach, Trevor, has really transformed my performance. Ben's vocal coach, Reshma, has really done a lot with him popping his P's. Like, it was really bad in season 1. Our IT crew, Xander, Nancy, and Delilah, just keeping all of our technology up to date. Of course, Randy in logistics, making sure all of our swag gets out on time. The warehouse staff with Tom, Steve, and Polly down there, just making sure that stuff is good. The product development team, Aaron, Charles, and Wesley, the stuff that they churn out is just unbelievable. Our asset management and security guy, Lance, is just fantastic. We had some thefts in season 2, but we took care of that now. And, of course, all of our sponsors, Audible, Anheuser-Busch, Mattel, Dutch Brothers Coffee, Dynamic Discs, Nike, Microsoft, the New Jersey Division of Travel and Tourism, and, of course, Nicki Minaj. Now,
Can't forget Nicki Minaj.
Can't forget Nicki Minaj. And I will say we are having a special event just for this episode. So, listeners, if you're hearing my voice, I want you to go onto Twitter and I want you to tweet BAM501.
It's not called Twitter anymore.
Oh, X or whatever it is. I need you to send an X to BAM501, BAM501 at Nicki Minaj. And a few of our lucky listeners will be ignored by her and then probably blocked.
And then you could say, I got blocked by Nicki Minaj. Josh, that was breathtaking. Can I take a moment and thank a few additional people?
Oh, sure,
you forgot our audio producers, Ammon and Jairus, as well as our logo artist, Jonica.
Dude, what's really funny is, listeners, if you haven't picked up on this, everything that I just said, I made up. And so none of that was real. But then Ben was very quick to come in and actually thank real people that have contributed to this podcast. So I can't emphasize this enough. I was lying. Ben was not. We have legitimate thanks owed to the people that Ben just thanked.
No, Josh, you were right. Our wives could have shut us down at any time.
Yeah. And yes, they could have and arguably should have.
Well, that's a great time to transition into some follow-up from our last episode where we talked about the book Invisible Women, about the data gender gap by Carolyn Creator-Perez. So I've had several questions from listeners, and one was not referencing episode 104, but episode 103. You and I were talking about potentially reading this book, and you said something to the effect of that your wife I already feel like I'm going to say something wrong, is a self-identified feminist, and that you're very sympathetic to her, I can't pick the right vocabulary words here.
I have never seen you this cautious. Are you this afraid of Nicole? It's the right level of fear.
A little bit. I don't want to get it wrong. But then you'd said something to the effect of, and I believe in the things that she supports, but I wouldn't want to pick it or anything like that. And then I asked you the question, why, Josh, don't you believe in the efficacy of picketing? And you had already moved on to another topic. And this listener had asked me, they said, I kind of want to hear where that discussion goes. Like, let's talk about feminism and Josh's belief in the efficacy of picketing.
Oh, I don't think we need to bring feminism into this. I think picketing in itself lives in its own part of my brain.
Let's talk about picketing, but then we'll tie in feminism.
I'm a process guy, right? I'm a rules guy. I'm a firm believer in, like, there is a process in the bureaucracy to make the positive changes that we all want. And granted, those processes are broken and they suck because of 100 different reasons, because of the two-party system, because of first past the post voting, because of gerrymandering. because of election cycles. Like there's 100 things you can point to that contribute to this overall problem of why it's impossible
You're right.
to move
Those are
systemic
all
change.
very concrete, specific processes.
Right. So then my problem becomes that we have a process. Yes, it's broken. Yes, it's terrible. But we want to make change. And so, but the process for making change sucks. So we're going to do this other thing. We're going to pick it, and we're going to make people aware of the problems that we have. And I don't even know if that's like the ultimate goal of the picketing. If it's to, like, I know you went to a couple picketing events for
yeah, I've been to probably 4 in my lifetime.
I don't understand what the end goal there is. Like, it feels like time and energy and logistics. It's a lot of investment from a lot of different people, but I don't know if it's having nearly the impact that same time and effort and energy could if it was focused in different ways. Like, instead
would you characterize picketing as an extra procedural event? Like,
yeah.
You don't think of it as its own process?
I don't think of it as its own process. I think of it as something visible that we can do. And I'm not trying to bag on picketers, but like picketing is more to make the picketers feel better that they did something than it is actually driving the change that they want. Honestly, I feel like the time spent picketing would be much better spent in either a letter writing campaign or calling and harassing your local congressman. Like, I don't know how much impact either of those things are going to have, but at least the congressman has a say in the process.
So in a country where we have freedom of the press, we don't have like state media that's suppressing picketing. Like if you tried to picket in China or Russia, good luck getting that on the news tonight.
There's a guy in Tiananmen Square that wants to talk to you about that.
Yeah, exactly. But in America, picketing will actually have the desired effect of getting you some attention. That reporters will show up. It'll be in the news media. It'll be on the paper. It'll be on TV. It'll be, it is a way to just get attention towards a cause.
But is that the goal? Is it just to increase the awareness of this cause to people that aren't clued into it, and then hopefully they'll help drive the change?
So having been through this a couple of times, it's really multifaceted. There's a lot of things. One, like a couple of times I've been involved in picketing, it's when there were like teacher strikes. Now you have people that aren't at work, but if they just don't go to work and stay home, it's only half of the thing. They're not doing the work, but they're not getting any attention either. So it's like you got all these people that aren't doing anything right now. They need to show up to some central place where they can get some attention and also have a public voice for their grievances.
This is the part that I struggle with. Like, I understand the reason to strike and to drive home to management. Like, we are dissatisfied and this is what we are going to do to hold you accountable for this. But the attention piece is where it falls apart, because attention by itself doesn't change anything.
So I think there's 2 aspects to this. One is that you're seeking attention because you want to get I don't know, Josh, sometimes attention is the most valuable thing there is.
You say that, but like, there's only a handful of things in like a history book that I can point to that says there was this public demonstration, and then you can draw like dotted lines straight to actual legislative change in the country. And
maybe not a public demonstration. Let me give you an example that's historical, that happens to be in the Bible, but it's an actual historical event. So, Xerxes, like from the movie 300, where the Spartans stood against the armies of King Xerxes.
The Emperor of Persia, yeah.
Yes, the king of the known world at the time. He had an advisor that had a grudge against the Jews. Anti-Semitism is a very old practice. And he had basically convinced King Xerxes to order the genocide of the Jews. And they'd set a time in the future, like a year in the future, and one of his queens basically came before him and in violation of some of the protocols that could have resulted in her death, and convinced him not to do it. And instead they killed the people that had organized this genocide and saved the Jews. And the valuable commodity here was the ability to go before the king and plea for his attention. It was a picket of sorts.
So, I mean, that's a great example of how drawing attention to a systemic problem to an ultimate decision maker can lead to direct change. If there's a person that has all the authority to make the systematic changes that you're looking for, and they are unaware of your problem, then picketing makes a ton of sense. In a system where any change is going to be driven from a legislative body that's going to take months, if not years, to actually manifest, like having an event where everybody comes together and pickets for a day or two or even a couple of weeks, that's not going to drive the change that you want.
So the most recent picketing event I participated in was a Black Lives Matter march following the George Floyd murder in Minnesota. And I'm not trying to corner you on like the issue at hand, but do you feel like the picketing played an important part of the cultural upheaval that happened at that time?
I think the picketing was a demonstration of the cultural upheaval. And I think of the cultural dissatisfaction with the state of law enforcement in punitive justice system that we have in our country. But again, like I'm it's not that I don't disagree. I very much agree with that. I think our law enforcement and our justice system is flawed from one end to the other. But I don't see how
there's a process for fixing it.
Right, and the picketing is extracurricular to that. Like the picketing is, yes, and it's an outlet, a much needed outlet for frustration and for giving people voice. But I at least for me personally, and again, this is just my opinion, I don't see the direct ties between public demonstration and systematic change that has to happen. Like what the changes are, it's still going to have to be legislative. There's still going to have to be bills proposed. There's still going to have to be, the handshake deals with politicians in the back doors or whatever. And so I don't see how the picketing contributes to that in a real sense.
Let me give two other perspectives on it, why I believe that this is important. One isn't just that you come up with picketing as a strategy to try to implement change. Another, I think, is that it's a public manifestation of the need for change. It's not a means to an end. It's like a symptom of conflict.
I mean, I agree, but at the same time, like during all the upheaval, the picketing and the public demonstrations during the George Floyd incident, during the Black Lives Matter, during, all of the multiple school shootings that we had, there have been still public demonstrations for all of these. What I see happening is that every politician capitalizes on it. Every politician that's from that district or from that area will show up and say
how.
And they will say all
the
right things.
They go to the marches where the protesters have the signs and they're marching and shouting.
Hang on a second. Let me land my plane here, because they go there. They get the cameras that were there for the picketers. They get the cameras to swing over to them, to their face. They say all the right things, and then they leave and they do nothing different. They're utilizing the attention that the picketers are trying to bring to this. I think problem.
That's hyperbolic. I think some things have changed, are in the process of changing, but. Okay.
I hope you're right, and I really do. Again, this is why I don't go to picketing events, because I can't make the. Because
you're right.
I can't
a bunch
of
picketers yelling angry slogans is not proposing useful legislation that can bring about long-term change, but it can be a precipitating event that will foment public opinion. If I'm a legislator and I was on the fence about something and there are people marching outside on the steps of the Capitol, this gives me an excuse to switch sides and be like, you know what? I see it their way. I'm going to change my vote.
Yeah, that is the strongest argument that has been made for picketing in my mind to this point, is you might swing a minority of middle of the road legislators.
But if a cause can't even muster enough public outrage to get a few people to take a day off work and go stand outside on the steps of the Capitol, then is it even worth paying attention to? Can you imagine?
That's okay. Hang on a second. Now you're talking about a completely different problem where legislators are no longer beholden to their constituents, and so it requires these extracurricular demonstrations in order to get something to their attention threshold. Let me do
a reducto ad absurdum. I'm a reporter. Hi, I'm coming here to you from the, where are we? We're in the bedroom of Chuck Jones. And Chuck, you're sitting at your computer here, and I see you brought up the email address of your congressman. And you're writing a well-worded, reasonable, thought-out email to him that you are outraged about the current status of things. Is that true, Chuck? Like, that's not a thing. That's not happening.
Okay, we're talking about two different things, because I agree with everything that you just said. What I am saying is that the process by which a legislature is being held responsible or is understanding the needs of their constituents is currently broken, because it requires demonstrations like this to even communicate to them what's important. Because of the first past the post, because of the gerrymandering, because of the two-party system, These people know that they're not beholden to their constituents because there is no real race. My district is red. I will always get voted into this office. I just need to go in glad hand for a couple of weeks out of the year, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. If they had legitimate races against other candidates, they would have to be beholden to their constituents. They would have to build a process into their office to collect and understand their grievances to push forward in the government.
Yeah. So having been a member in middle management of a giant bureaucratic organization that in some respects kind of mirrors the country in which we live and are governed by, I've seen this thing happen time and time again where someone will be crushed by an inefficient process or endless bureaucracy or something like that, and they'll express frustration about the system, and someone will say, well, why don't you just follow the process for changing it? But Josh, you know as much as I do that even the supposedly self-balancing processes that are designed to fix things are very ineffectual sometimes.
You are talking to a person that experienced that firsthand, followed the correct process, and got to put the middle finger to everyone when the process came through in my favor. If you're going to say that some of these processes aren't very good, I will agree with you. But if you're going to say to me the processes are completely broken and don't work, therefore we need to come up with something else, that's where I'm going to stop and disagree with you.
I'm not saying either one of those things. I'm saying that while I believe that processes need to have checks and balances, that also there are times where there needs to be a major correction instead of a minor one. A good example I can think of is about a decade ago, there was a Secretary of the Air Force, and she does as they do. They go around, tour all the bases, and try to talk directly to airmen. And she kept hearing a lot of them say, we have too many annual computer-based trainings that we have to do and too many regulations that are redundant and overlapping. And she could have easily said to every one of those airmen, there's a process for changing that. Just follow the process and we'll fix it. But it'd become endemic. And so what she did is she got back and she commissioned a small group of leaders, Tiger Team or whatever, fancy term you want to use to describe it. And she said, I want a top-down review of the totality of what we're requiring airmen to do in computer-based training every year and the totality of the regulations that we're asking them to follow. And this team, within a very short amount of time, identified hundreds of hours of training that they either duplicated and eliminated the duplication of or completely removed as a requirement and did the same to the regulations. And it was a one-time correction, and it was because of this top-down approach that was brought basically by picketing.
Two things to your example, which is a fantastic example of, one, that in this case, we can do a one-to-one translation of a representative of the authority regime that is directly beholden to their constituents. This person came down and asked, what is important to you, and then acted on it. This is what we want our local congressmen, our senators to do, and they don't. Two, this person was also the ultimate authority of this whole thing. And so if this exact same example had, like that you were talking about, had been said, but instead of the head of the Air Force coming down and talking to people, it was a representative of a body of 50 people that needed to make decisions, I'll bet that would have gone a little differently. It's a lot easier to convince one person that action needs to be taken, and that action will be taken if that person has the authority to take said action. If you're trying to convince 100 people to take an action, then it's much more of a problem if they have incentives that are not lined up with yours.
Okay, I love that. The British have this thing. I'm going to get it wrong because I didn't do any research on this, but it just occurred to me. Every year they have this thing where the Prime Minister has to go down to the House of Commons, and they have a whole day where they just get to ask him any questions they want. And it turns into a big dog and pony show where they're asking him a bunch of got you questions, but it's a representation of what you're talking about. Like we've concentrated power in this one person, and yeah, we've all got grievances that we're airing every day, but for one day a year, we're going to make him come and sit here all day, and he has to listen to us, and we get to ask him any question we want.
It's a reverse State of the Union. I love that. I want U.S. House of Representatives to pepper the president with questions once a year. That would be much better to watch.
Yeah, it is quite a show. I'll see if I can find a link of it. It turns into a bit of a, how like our State of the Union address turns into this competition where all the representatives in the room either stand up and clap or don't stand up and clap. It's kind of like that, but in reverse. Anyway, back to what we were talking about. So you and I read this book about the gender data gap.
The gender data gap.
Gender data gap.
Are you okay? You need a coffee today?
And we kind of talked about how Carolyn Credo Perez brought up a lot of issues, but didn't present a lot, probably wisely didn't present a lot of solutions. So one of our listeners asked me, all right, it's up to you and Josh now. What are you going to do to make things better?
Yeah, you know what? And this is a very valid criticism of people talking to us about this book, because it was, while we kept saying how much we agreed with the premise, like a lot of what we talked about was like, well, I didn't really like this part of it or whatever. So that might have presented the wrong impression. Like, we both very much like this book, and I'm appreciative of having read it. And I actually had an experience yesterday, Ben, as we are recording, that really ties well into this. So I'm not going to go into details, and I'm not going to let you ask me any questions about this. But I went to a local Rotary Club. Now I'm fumbling. I went to a local Rotary Club meeting yesterday for the first time with my dad. We just wanted to see what it was about. And I experienced this male default thinking. And it was... This group is doing charitable giving, and they were putting together care packages for homeless kids that are attending high school in their district. So like a bunch of high schools in North Phoenix. And they asked for volunteers to help them assemble everything. They had everything, all these toiletries and things broken out into stations, and they were going to pass a backpack down, and you have to put one item of toiletries from your station into the backpack and then move it down the line. And they had two different assembly lines for these care packages, one for males and one for female students. And as they're demonstrating this assembly line process, so we were all ready to help, at the end of it, they said, and the girl's backpack gets one of these long pink chiffon ribbons, and we're going to tie it to the handle of the backpack because they're different. And I know what she meant was that the female backpacks are different because they had different sets of toiletries in there. Obviously, because women have different hygienic needs than men do. But what was interesting to me is, as I was sitting there, that would never have occurred to me had I not read this book, was why do the female backpacks get the handle ribbon? Why don't the male backpacks get a blue ribbon? Why aren't we labeling both of them? We're not labeling both of them, to be clear between the genders.
Males are the default.
Males are the
default.
default.
Are the exception.
And we are labeling the females, the ones that are different. And yeah, and I otherwise, without having read that book, that never would have even crossed my mind.
Okay, you said there were two things.
Yes, the other thing was, as I was sitting in this meeting and they were discussing the charitable good that they did, I couldn't help but think to myself, how many women are in here? And I started looking around, and I actually counted up how many men and how many women were in the room actually part of this charitable giving organization. And it was about 2/3 men and 1/3 women. Because I'm an accountant, I couldn't help but do the math. And yes, I did count everybody.
Okay. Yeah, that probably helped you pass the meeting too. Well, those are great examples, Josh, that you just having read this, it changed the way that you think and examine things and made you conscious of male default thinking and gender bias.
And that's all it was. Like, it had a positive influence on me. If for no other reason, then I'm just aware of these things out in the world.
Yeah. So I made a list of verbs. Picketing was one. We talked about that already. Support. You could just do supportive things when the time comes, when it's your moment to do something supportive. You can vote. You can engineer things. If you're in a place where you're engineering things, think about what women's requirements are and how that might be different. You can buy. You can choose to use the power of the almighty dollar to support companies and causes that are favorable to this, or not support ones that aren't. You can advocate. You can hire. That actually is one you mentioned specifically when we talked about this. You're like, if I open my own accounting practice, I can be blind in my choosing of employees so that I'm not being gender biased.
Yeah, if you're in a position where you have authority to hire, then based on the data that we've seen, I would highly encourage you to mask personal identifying information when you're reviewing resumes.
How would you go about doing that, just from a mechanical point of view? Would you have someone that screens them and redacts it for you?
That is entirely dependent upon the hiring processes that you have internal to your company. Like, how do you actually receive these resumes? Like, you could, for example, I work in a firm with 4 people. And if I was tasked with hiring somebody, I would have the resumes go to one of our admin staff, and I would tell them, hey, just copy and paste the bullets into a different document or something, or redact all of the name, age, gender data from all of it, and just give me the information. Like I would have that one level filter of somebody that doesn't have the authority to hire and have them just give me the raw data.
Okay. I got 3 more verbs for you. One is pay. You can pay women equally what they're worth. Choose. You can choose to do things that are sensitive to these causes, and you can read. And this is a decision I made a while ago, that I would be more equal in the material I was choosing to read to help myself get the perspective and ideas of women in my life.
Now, is that, when you say read, are you talking about you're going to go out of your way to read feminist style books, or to read more books written by women?
More books written by women.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I've done that pretty well. Somebody challenged me to do that a while back. I think it was my sister, and I tried it, and I liked it, and I've been enjoying it ever since. Josh, I had a realization. You pointed out that we're starting our 5th year podcasting together, and having done something that regularly for that long makes you start to realize a pattern that, even though it's a very small data set of you and I've started to realize something that feels psychologically significant. So tell me if you've experienced this.
Okay.
I listen to each episode probably 3 times. Once while we're recording it, once while I'm editing it, and again, I'll listen to it once it's finally edited. I'll just put it on while I'm running or cleaning or something like that. And what happens while I'm listening to it over the course of it is that I will have an internal dialogue as I'm listening to it, almost unconsciously, where I'm going through the same thoughts as I did the first time, the second and third time.
So yes, I have experienced listening back to the podcast weeks after the fact, like while I'm on a run or something, and you will say something, and my brain, before my mouth can say it on the podcast, my brain will verbalize exactly the same words. Not because I remember it, but because that's the channel that you set my brain down.
So there's 3 outcomes I have as I'm doing this. I would say probably 70% of the time is the outcome you just described, where listening to you and I talk and hearing you say something, my brain will think the next thing, and then past me says that thing. That's 70% of the time. The other 30% of the time is one of 2 possible things. I will think something different or be surprised by what past me said. Because either I've learned something new and my thinking has changed, or maybe, the lecture that Jeff Goldblum's character gives on the original Jurassic Park movie where he drips a bead of water on the back of his hand.
Yeah, the little micro chaos theory or whatever.
Chaos theory. That's it. And I feel like sometimes it's just chaotic. Like the day that we had the discussion the first time, I was in a certain mood. I was hungry. I was tired. We talked about a certain things before, something I'd read that day, and then the next time I listen to it, it's a different day, different mindset, different environment, different circumstances, and I don't think the same thoughts.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. There are some times where I will recognize listening back to the podcast, and this happens if I listen to the podcast for like an hour, then I have to stop to go do something else, and I break the listening up into multiple sections, and I'll start listening to it the second half, either a later date or just later in the day, and I realize that the conversation that we have, like, you like to think that your brain is consistently the same all the time, and it's just snapshots of...
Replay it back, do the same thing over again, and you'd have the exact same outcome.
Right. But what I'm realizing is that it's more... The conversation we have is a river. It's a channel. And, like, the longer that we talk, the more our brain is set into this riverbed. And it's not that each comment that we're making is happening in isolation based on all of our weighted averages and life experiences or whatever, how we would respond to that question right now in this second. It's also being influenced by everything that we have talked about up to that point. And so sometimes, very rarely, where I have those experiences like you said, where I would have said something different, it's because I stopped, I've broken the listening up, and I'm not in that channel anymore. And now my brain is more in the fluid, like just grabbing at straws, I guess.
So that feels like chaos theory explanation. So I'm going to go back to the middle one I said, and that is sometimes something you say to me in the course of those conversations influences me in that you change my thinking permanently. So that then the next time I listen to it, I think of it differently because you taught me something new, gave me a new way to look at it, said something to me. And I'd like to think that's one of the values of this podcast. As we've said a lot in the past, but maybe not recently, if you always want to be right.
Yep, you always have to be willing to change your mind.
That's it. And we are in on this podcast, one of our enduring values is that we're seeking further light and knowledge. We're trying to think critically about the world around us and learn how to be right by potentially changing our mind. And sometimes I do.
Well, Ben and listeners, I am happy to change your mind for the better. So please keep coming back, and I will keep doing that.
All right. There is one negative side effect of podcasting sometimes. I got to tell you a little story. So this week, a few people from my office went out for dinner after work, which was my colonel, her deputy, who's also a colonel, one of our chief master sergeants, who's the highest enlisted rank in the Air Force, and a couple other people. And we were all sitting around the table, and I had the occasion to tell them a story I related on this podcast before about the time I was taken to Puerto Rico as a hostage on an aircraft that was simulating a hijacked aircraft.
Which is a good story and an excellent example of how you always look on the bright side.
Yeah, and they were all aghast at that story, and I kind of had them in the palm of my hand. So I told them one other story that I haven't told in this podcast. For one time where I was in England, my colonel didn't want to go to an event in downtown London, so he sent me on his behalf, and he gave me his tickets and sent me to this black tie dinner at this fancy hotel in like downtown London, and there were members of Parliament and 4-star generals. It was insane.
That's awesome.
During the course of telling them this story, I did one verbal thing that I'm really embarrassed. I'm going to tell you now. I said, oh yeah, I showed up to it and everyone was in tuxedos and I was in mess dress. That's like a military tuxedo.
You and explained I realized to a bunch of people who own mess dress that what mess
I
dress
had just explained what a military uniform was to people with maybe 100 years of cumulative military experience.
Oh yeah? Oh yeah, Major, you're going to tell me what boots are next?
Oh my gosh, Josh. But here's the thing. Here's a life skill. Listeners, here's a life skill for you. I've found that if you make one of these social full pods, you have about a 2-second window of opportunity where if you recognize it and just call yourself out, it completely disarms it and it actually comes across really well. So I said, before I carried on my story, I looked at their faces and I could see it registering and I'm like, I cannot believe I just said that. I just went into podcast mode. And that's exactly what it was. Like if I was on the podcast and I said, oh yeah, I was in mess dress, Josh, that's like a military tuxedo. You wouldn't think that I was mansplaining what mess dress is to you. You would recognize that I was explaining it to our audience who's sitting here eavesdropping on our conversation.
Right. I would realize that because we've built this into ourselves in the last 5 years that we have this switch in our brains that's footnote mode. And then we try to catch all the weird things that we say and then footnote it for explanation.
Right. And so I was doing that in real life when it wasn't at all appropriate, and I was really embarrassed. But the fact that I called it out to them made everyone laugh, and it disarmed the whole thing, and it was great.
That's funny. So yeah, you told one story. So one story is your limit. Like if you're out in the normal world, you can tell one story and be in normal mode. But if you start monologuing for too long, you'll accidentally switch into podcast mode. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Embarrassing. Josh, you sent me a text a little while ago that you had done something that I think is a parenting rite of passage. In fact, I think we talked about it on this podcast when your children were very young and my children were getting the age that your children are now. And it was about the decision as a couple and as parents to give your child their first mobile phone. So is it time for Bad at Parenting?
Sure. Let's do a Bad at Parenting. So my son started 6th grade this year. And just we were talking about it, and with the after school events that are happening and just the schedule that we have, there's going to be periods of time where one or both of our children are going to be at home by themselves for like 30 minutes to an hour. And my son's going to be 12. They know the rules. Like we have rules for if we're not in the house, what do? We don't answer the door. We don't look out the windows. We don't eat any food. And we have our at the time, it's our watch with us at all times. Like, excellent.
Do you still have landline phones in your house?
No, we do not have landline phones, but we have. Okay. A long time ago, we bought this thing. It's a smartwatch essentially, but it's made for kids, and it only
we talked about this on the podcast. I think.
Super lockdown, does geofencing. He can text, and they can send short voice messages to phone numbers that we've built into the thing. So it's really good for one-way communication from a child to a parent, and it was really affordable, and it just made sense at the time.
Okay, you bought that like 3 years ago. So I'm curious, have you continued using it over that 3 years?
Absolutely. Like anytime.
What's the frequency of use?
It's become less and less for my son. Like we used it for my son for like a year and a half, especially if he was going to like school events or if he was going to be outside of normal boundaries or whatever. But it then has made a transition to where now my daughter is the one that's using it for most time. For example, there was a summer program that she went to where she had to get on the bus and go to summer school. And the schedule was wonky and the bus schedule was weird. And I was working from home every day. And so we gave her the watch and we told her, when you get on the bus, send us a message on the watch. And then I would pull it up on my phone and I would watch her GPS location as it got closer to the bus stop. So that way I knew exactly when I needed to go out and pick her up from the street. And so anyway, like all of these discussions where it's like, okay, there's going to be the potential for two children to be separate in separate places, and we need to keep track of them both. So
right. But you're reciting the list of requirements, and I don't think there's any parent out there that doesn't agree that it's good if since technology enables it for you to be able to have communications and geographic tracking of a child. But the dilemma is there's trade-offs, because if you give them a phone, there's a whole bunch of other things that comes along with that might be undesirable.
So this is the 2-day ongoing discussion my wife and I had, talking about all the downsides and like, all right, if he gets a phone, he's going to have access to the internet, he's going to have access to text messaging, email, social media, the whole thing. And so we need to have good, solid parental procedural controls and then technological controls. And so I started researching the technological controls that we could implement. And it turns out if you're getting an Android, if you're an Android family, Google already has this built in. If you have the kid log into the phone initially as their child account, that has to be part of one of your parental accounts. It already has all the parental controls built in. So nice. Google did a great job with that. Like if he wants to download an app, it notifies my phone and I have to approve it first. So that Google just took care of, built in all the parental controls that I needed.
I'll kind of agree with that, but having experienced it for decades, it's not as good as it feels like. Like when there'll be days when I'll get like 5 of those notifications pop up while I'm working or something like that, and I don't got time to go research all those apps and see what they're about and what they're doing and stuff like that. And there's not really a good way to queue them up and do it later. It's just this momentary decision where like a kid's running in the room. Dad, can I have $10? Sure, here you go. I'm busy. Like, wait. What did you need the $10 for?
It's just no every time. If you're busy and they want to download an app and you don't know what the app is, the answer is no. They can talk to you later. If they needed it today, then they should have talked to you yesterday. That's just bad planning.
Okay, so I've been getting those this week.
But here's the thing. Like what you're talking about, that's not the technological control. The technological control gives me the yes or no to this person downloading this app. The procedural control fills in the gap, the knowledge gap that you're talking about.
Okay.
And that's when we talked to him, like, because I'll tell you, Ben, then we shopped for a phone, and then we found one that was affordable that had it's still a phone, but it's not a flagship. He doesn't need a flagship. We got him the FE, which is the fans edition, they call it. So it's the last generation, and they stripped out a bunch of the super advanced tech from it, but it still has all the functionality that he wants. And so then we figured out what we're going to, like, what our procedural controls are. And then we unwrapped it and we handed it to him. We're like, okay, these are the rules for this phone. And these are what we have implemented for it. And Ben, metaphorically, it felt like my wife and I pulling out the tower shields, like from the Roman Legion, and getting our short swords and spears out and like preparing for this onslaught charge of the entire internet and world, trying to
I can feel the music building as you guys are giving him this epic speech, and then crickets.
And then nothing happened. That's exactly what it was. Like he's had it for like 3 weeks now, and it's been a nothing burger that whole time.
Awesome.
Part of it is because we've got solid controls. The other part of it is like he just wants to watch his YouTube channels on it, and like that's all he does. And we told him part of the procedure is like you don't text strangers, you don't tell anybody your actual name, you don't tell anybody your actual age, your address, none of that stuff. Like you're allowed to give your phone number to your friends so they can text you, but nobody else. And if you don't know who the number is, you don't talk back to them. Blah 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 blah. And then he looked at me in the face confused, and he goes, "Why would I ever talk to somebody that I don't know on the internet?" And my wife and I both almost laughed out loud. And I told him, "Kid, in 6 months, you're going to get sucked into some social media platform that I've never heard of before. And then that's all you're going to do." But like he hasn't happened yet, and he still doesn't get like, what? Why would they even think I'm going to talk to random people? Like, just because he hasn't done it yet. It's an unknown to him.
Yeah. I remember, when I got through Facebook and MySpace and all those kinds of stuff, and then the kids come along and they're doing Snapchat and Discord and TikTok, and it just never ends.
So I'll tell you the first lesson, like this whole thing, like I said, it's been a nothing burger. But the first real lesson I think the phone is teaching him, I'm watching it play out currently. Because 2 nights ago, it was his turn to do the dishes. I'm like, hey, do the dishes. Like, sure, no problem. And he's over there and he's doing the dishes. And then slowly over time, I noticed the sound of plates moving from one place to another decreases, or the length of time between plates moving increases. And I look over there and he's been in the kitchen for 30 minutes, which is about average for a kid doing the dishes. But I look and it's only half done and he's just leaning over the counter watching YouTube on his phone.
Oh, is this the first time you've had this problem?
This is not
Don't you guys own like tablets or anything like that?
This is the first time that he's brought it in while he's doing his chores, because he sees me put my headphones in and listen to my audiobook while I'm doing chores and stuff all the time. But I don't think he's made the distinction that I'm listening, I'm not looking. It doesn't require my full attention.
Right. So he thinks he's just doing the same thing you're doing, but it's not at all the same.
Well, and it started out well enough because he had it playing and he was still doing the chores. But like as these attention things do, it slowly took more and more and more of his attention without him realizing it. This is the key. And
this was your first time doing this.
This is my first time, and this is the thing. I didn't shut it down. I didn't, oh, you're grounded from your phone or whatever. I'm like, hey, you've been in there a long time. What are you doing? And then he looks up from his phone. He's like, what? Oh, I'm like, yeah. You're looking at your phone instead of doing the work you're supposed to be doing, aren't you? He's like, yeah, I guess so. I'm like, so what do you think you should do? He's like, I should probably turn this off until it's done. That'd probably be a good idea.
Yeah,
and then he shut it off. And then yesterday, it's like he would come home from school. I'm like, hey, do your homework. He's like, okay, sure. I just got a little bit of band practice or band homework, no problem. And he opens his little band book, and all it does, it shows him sheet music, and he has to label the notes, the different notes to their proper letter, right? But he sits there, he opens the book, and he sets his phone down, and he turns on the YouTube. I'm like, let's see how this plays out. And that kid...
Listeners, Josh looked like he sat down and got a bag of popcorn.
And like... He set himself up at a standing table, like a standing height table for himself, because I know I'm looking at him like in his mind, this is going to take 2 minutes and he's going to walk away. And it should have, because there's only like 15 notes on this page, right? And he was standing there for like 20 minutes. And I didn't tell him, I didn't cue him into what the problem was. I knew what the problem was, is that he's letting 80% of his attention flow over to YouTube while he's trying to do something that's legit. Instead, I was just constantly prompting him, like, hey, how's your homework going? And then he would like shake his head like, oh, yeah, it's going really well. And he'd go back and do a couple more and then watch him slowly get sucked back into his phone. Wow. So I'm trying to balance this lesson, because this is a lesson he's going to have to learn. That like,
I love this. The first one, it's new and you guys he isn't self-aware yet. He will be, but he isn't yet.
Right. And so this is why I didn't tell him, put the phone away and do your work. He needs to figure this out on his own. Like, wait a minute. I am really bad at getting work done while I have this distracting device out. And he's going to struggle with that his whole life. And so he needs to learn an internalized lesson right now. It can't be me.
I love that you're teaching it to him in a low-risk way in a safe environment.
Well, it's not that I'm teaching him. It's more that
Josh, that's
I'm
exactly
letting
what
him,
you're doing.
I'm letting him learn. That's the difference. I'm not telling him, like, this is the lesson and you will internalize it and you can figure it out later.
That's teaching.
Is that what it is?
Teaching.
I feel like this is the dad version of the kid's going to stick the fork in the outlet, and the mom's like, "No, don't do that." I'm like, "No, hang on, let him try it, see what happens."
Yeah. Oh, okay, but this isn't as dangerous as putting a fork in the outlet. It's just like his chores take too long.
Right. Exactly.
So I have a protocol for this with my kids who now are aware that they're doing it. My youngest daughter's probably the biggest offender at this. I'll send her in the kitchen, do a chore. She's like ignored me like 10 times, and I'm finally like, no, get in there right now and do it. And then she'll go in the kitchen and start messing with her phone, and I'll ask what she's doing. She's like, I want to put some music on while I'm doing it. I'm like, yeah, you've been doing that for 20 minutes. How long does it take to put music on? So my protocol is, I'll give him like one of those warnings, and then I will walk up to him, take the phone, turn it off, stick it in my pocket, and be like, now you don't even get any music. So when the chore is done, you can get your phone back. And then she gets it done, and then she gets her phone back, and then next time she just puts the music on.
So, that is the classic parenting approach to this, right? And like the fact that you're actually giving them a warning, that's you accommodating that. I hope it doesn't get to that point that his fascination with his new smart device is so total that he's incapable.
But the way you described it was so guileless. It was, he wasn't doing it on purpose. It was just happening to him. Well, this is the real danger.
The real danger is that they're aware that they're blowing off doing the chore to do the thing that they would rather be doing. Well, then it's not so
you-
much. It's not so much a lesson about you need to do the chores before you have fun. It's a lesson of this chore needs to be done, and you need to manage your time. If you want to sit there and fiddle with your phone, whatever. If you're down here until 2 a.m. doing these dishes, I don't care. Your responsibility is to achieve this objective, and if I don't put time constraints on it, that's on you.
Yeah, I mean, if you give a kid a smartphone and you were to make a standard bell curve of all the possible negative outcomes, way at one end, they're like hacking into the Pentagon and the FBI are on the way, and way at the other end, there's like some nefarious predator on his way to your house. But in the middle is just all the like boring dystopian stuff. Like he just becomes so bad at paying attention that he doesn't get anything done.
Or I think the worst danger there is they go through life unaware of what the opportunity cost of staring at their phone is. Like, I want him to figure out and internalize that I have this fixed amount of focus and attention and effort that I can put towards something, and this phone takes away from it. Yes, it is more pleasurable, but it's decreasing my ability to perform the things that I need to do.
So Apple has this thing, tell me if Android has it, where basically it's on by default, and once a week it'll kick out a report that tells you how much time you spent staring at your phone every day.
So on my phone,
it breaks it up by app.
Yeah, that report kicks out to me. I don't know if I'm sure I could take his phone. This is part of the procedure. Like, his phone is subject to forfeit and full inspection at a moment's notice with 0 questions asked. So I could find it there, but it's not pushed to my phone from his, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I'm not asking from a parenting point of view. I mean, for you as an individual. I think this is a brilliant thing. Like, if you're a smartphone producer, you don't necessarily get more value if people spend more time a day staring at your phone. Like, you're not interested in just turning everyone into phone-staring zombies. That's up to the software producers that are making apps and games for it that are trying to monetize your attention. But as far as the hardware and operating system device producer, they don't have a dog in the fight of getting more and more and more of your attention. So what they are doing, and I think it's a good thing in the interest of public wellness, is that they have this app that's just, hey, did you know you spent 4 hours a day staring at your screen last week? It just thought you might like to know.
That's a mindfulness thing. I'll talk about that later.
I got an idea, Josh. My sister-in-law, who I think is in the hospital having a baby right now, did this really brilliant thing for the family, and she sent out all the work that she'd done on it. She calls it the Foundling Quiz. You didn't look at this, did you?
I did not.
Am I catching you cold with it?
There's a link in the show notes, and next to the link it says, don't read ahead. So, of course, I follow the rules, Ben.
Okay, all right, good. So, what this is it's 20 questions of fictional characters that fit the standard definition of a foundling, as in a young person that's uneducated that has to learn to do something to become the hero. So it could be books, it could be movies. I'm going to read you these single one or two sentences that describe the foundling, and then you have to try to name the book and or movie that does it.
Geez, this is like every Disney protagonist ever.
Okay, it could be Disney. We don't need to narrow it down to begin with. I'll give you an example. We'll do it together, and once you get the hang of it, then we'll do the rest. Listeners, you can listen along and do this yourself. During the crossing from England, a young girl discovers this foundling afloat in the wreckage of a vessel that has been attacked by pirates. Who's the foundling?
I don't know. It's probably from some literature. Like, I'm sure as soon as you say it, I'll know it. But I want to say
it's Will Turner from.
Yeah, yes, Treasure Island. That's what I was. Yeah, that was the closest thing that I thought, but I don't remember how that book started.
Yeah. Okay. So now you get the how it works
shtick.
And what's going on. Okay. This foundling shares a birthday with his uncle. His uncle leaves him a precious piece of jewelry.
Oh, it's Frodo from Lord of the Rings.
Yes. Number 3. The father of this foundling was a swordsmith and was murdered by an extradigited client.
Oh, yes. Inigo Montoya. You killed my father.
That's right. Prepare to die. Number 4. This foundling is raised by his aunt and uncle and has a very small space in the house to call his own.
Oh, it's Harry Potter. Living under
Number
the stairs.
5. A king defeats a giant, brings this trickster foundling back to his kingdom, and raises him as a prince with his own son.
Ah, this is Loki, Odin's son.
Yes, good. I thought that you were going to miss that one for a sec. Okay, number 6. This foundling is rescued from a Spanish influenza death by a supernatural means and is raised by his rescuer.
Oh, jeez. I don't know this one.
This is Edward Cullen from the Twilight books.
Oh, that's why I don't know this one. Freaking, those are the worst depictions of vampires in all of pop culture. Get that crap out of here.
Number 7. This boastful, carefree foundling has a never-ending childhood.
Peter Pan.
Yes.
There's
Number
some
8.
dead giveaways in these.
They are. This is a quiz. It's like a, I don't know, like a
it's one of those feel-good quizzes. Like, oh, yay,
things, yeah.
I feel good because I know the answer. And
but there's enough on the fringes that people will miss a few, and there will be a clear winner at the end.
Edward Cohen.
Number 8. A crazy old wizard tries to watch over this foundling despite the uncle's dislike of the wizard's ancient religion.
Yes, this is King Arthur in Sword in the Stone.
Good guess. It's Luke Skywalker.
Oh, both of those apply. Dang it.
Yeah, nice. I love it. It was a double one. All right, number 9. These foundling siblings must protect their fortune from a distant relative.
Ooh. Siblings. There's a fortune. I don't know.
They're the Baudelaires from the series of Unfortunate Events books by Lemony Snicket. Became a movie with Jim Carrey.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't seen that one.
Number 10. A spoiled and self-centered foundling learns to soften her rude ways when she goes to live with her uncle and discovers some of his secrets.
This is going to be another one of those literature YA novels that I haven't read. It is.
It's a book called The Secret Garden. The character is Mary Lennox. That's the foundling. Number 11. This foundling is raised by her aunt and uncle in a dangerous part of the Midwest. Oh my.
I'm gonna go with what's her name? Oh, from Wizard of Oz. Dorothy.
Yes, Dorothy Gale. Very good.
Nice.
Number 12. Getting their start as cookie sellers, these foundling sisters move on to more heroic adventures.
Cookie sellers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
This is Margot, Edith, and Agnes from Despicable Me.
You know what? For some reason, in my mind, I had 2 sisters, not 3. That's a good one. That's a good one.
All right, number 13. This imaginative and quick-tempered foundling is raised by a pair of elderly siblings. Another book you probably haven't read.
Yeah, go for it.
Anne of Green Gables.
Definitely not. Yeah, sorry.
All right, I'll try not to give this one away. Caring for a remarkable pig is just not enough for the heroic dreams of this foundling.
The pig. Yeah, that's the girl from Charlotte's Web, right?
Good guess, but no. Similar time frame.
Caring for a pig.
Yeah.
Is this the guy from Babe? From the pig movie?
No, I think we may have nominated our next fiction book. This is high fantasy. It's a famous fiction series called The Prydain Chronicles. Some of the books in it are known as The Black Cauldron.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not.
The character is Terran Pigkeeper from The Prydain Chronicles. I think we should read one of those. I think that would be fun.
Pigkeeper. Classic.
Terran Pigkeeper.
Classic medieval times, like, job as your last name. That's great.
Yeah, Lloyd Alexander. All right, number 15. This foundling would like some more.
Like some more, please. Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about. What's her name? I don't know.
Oliver.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Yes. Number 16. This girl is away at boarding school when the tragedy for war results in her becoming a foundling.
Boarding school, war becomes a foundling. I
It's
can't.
Sarah Crewe from The Little Princess. A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett.
Your sister has read way more books than me.
Yes, she's very good like that. This foundling has darkness, no parents, and is super rich, which kind of makes it better.
Yeah, no, it's Batman? Is this Batman?
It is Batman from the Lego movie. A reformed criminal raises this foundling after her mother's run of mistreatment.
Oh, I don't know if this is right, but there's that movie with the assassin that like kind of pseudo adopts that little girl and like trains her to be a killer.
I think that might be an influence for this one. I think that's called The Professional.
Yeah, The Professional.
But this is Les Miserables. The character is Jean Valjean.
Yeah, Jean Valjean. Prisoner,
and that's a French actor in a French movie, and this is an old French book. I'm guessing there's some influence there.
I'm going to give myself partial credit.
We got two more.
Okay, go for it.
After being abducted as a kid, this foundling creates a family of his own, all while competing in a high-stakes dance-off.
You threw me with the dance-off. I don't know.
It's Peter Quill, a.k.a. Star-Lord
from
Guardians of the Galaxy.
You're right. The dance-off to save the planet. Man.
And our final foundling question. A billionaire seeking to improve his public image is charmed by a darling foundling girl and seeks to adopt her.
Oh, that's Annie, right?
Yes. Very good.
Yeah. You
got like 80% of those.
No, it was way closer, like 60%. The last run of the books in the middle teens there just destroyed me.
Yeah, I've never read A Little Princess or the Twilight books either, Josh.
That's cool. I like your little foundling quiz.
Yes,
it does boil down to,
good luck having a baby.
Have you consumed this particular media, and do you have a good enough memory?
Yeah. So there's kind of an art to that. You can see it on Jeopardy when they ask questions where like they don't expect the contestants to know every single property, but kind of have like a working knowledge of who was this author and what were his 3 most famous books and what were they kind of about.
I think they feed the Jeopardy contestants the categories and like a little bit of an explanation about stuff like that, don't they?
I don't know anything about that. I've read several books by Ken Jennings and nothing he said leads me to believe that that's true.
Then Jeopardy contestants are geniuses because it's hit or miss whether you've consumed any of that stuff.
He did talk in one of his books about the art of Jeopardy questions, about how they're written in such a way where it makes you feel really smart, but there's a lot there and you don't have to make as many assumptions as you think you do.
Interesting. Well, yeah. You mean how they write Jeopardy answers.
All right, Josh, what are you reading right now?
I'm actually reading.
We just finished a book together.
We just finished a book. I'm reading 2 books right now. So on audiobook, I am listening to Death Masks, which is the next series.
You went back to the Dresden Files.
Back to the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, and it's Harry in Chicago, Harry Dresden. I'm digging it. He's still everything I want, like a wizard in modern times to be. But nice. At the same time, I'm trying to churn through my wife's physical reading list that she has given to me. Oh,
yes. I disrupted your wife's reading list. Did she forgive me for that?
She did. She's fine.
Okay.
So I started with the first book she wanted me to read, and it's called Peace is Every Step, The Path of Mindfulness in Everyday Life. And it's by a Buddhist monk named, and I apologize for this pronunciation, it is incorrect. Check the show notes. It's Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, and I don't have the correct inflection symbols over the vowels, but it's a Buddhist monk who a ghostwriter basically compiled a bunch of his writings and a bunch of his sayings over the course of his life and put it out in this very short little pamphlet. And it's
Peace is every step. And I feel zen just saying that.
He's got a lot of interesting quotes, and like his premise so far has been your brain, your mind, and your body can be disconnected, but that can cause unhappiness. You should bring them back together all the time. Like whenever you're walking around doing one thing but thinking about another, that could be a cause of distress in your life or just bad feelings. You should just enjoy the present moment that you're in, regardless of what you're doing. It's very, I'm not gonna lie, it's very hippy dippy. I'm not sold on the entire premise just yet, but he has some good
When
quotes.
was it published?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you any of the important details that you would know instantly about your books. I have no idea. There's one quote in there so far that I really do enjoy, and he says, like, I've lost my smile, but that's okay. The dandelion has it.
I'm wondering, when I ask something like when was this published, what I'm trying to wonder here is, was this a thing that was done in the vein of like being utterly and completely timeless? Like we're still reading The Art of War by Sun Tzu, which was written hundreds and hundreds of years ago, or is it something that's a bit perishable?
So the foreword is by the ghost author, I think, that compiled all this together. And he talks about like this monk was a big presence during the Vietnam War. in trying to bring peace to these whole conflicts. And he's kind of ostracized from his country for these kinds of like, not anti-government, but like, hey, let's all just get along kind of sentiments. And the idea from the author was that he found it truly inspirational that this person, amidst all of this ridiculous conflict, can be such a strong advocate for nonviolence and peace and mindfulness and just like these higher ideals that everybody kind of wants. And so that's what the compilation is.
I love it. That feels timeless. That feels like it could be good enough that it would even transcend war. Like, you don't have to be in a war to be able to use those kinds of ideals. You can have peace of any kind.
He has a whole like 3 pages talking about how peaceful it can be to wash the dishes if you're one with yourself.
I've read a book like that by a Jewish concentration camp survivor from World War II called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And it was like that, where he kind of just written this timeless treatise on how do you try to find meaning in life, but then he related it to stories that happened to him in his life as being a concentration camp survivor in Germany.
It would be hard to translate those, I think.
Yeah. I'm reading a book. Again, this is another one why I don't know how it ended up in my reading queue, but it just did, and so I read it. It's called Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, The Surreal Heart of the New Russia by Peter Pomerantsev. And Peter is a British expat, I think with like a British father and a Russian mother. And so he was born speaking Russian. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and they were trying to reinvent Soviet Russia as a democratic Western state that wasn't being hampered by sanctions and stuff, they were seeking to hire lots of Westerners to come in and be consultants. So it's very lucrative to go to Russia if you spoke a little bit of Russian and kind of participate in their system. And this book is about how the system that they set up was like this distorted, dystopian, comedic version of the things that are thought of as Western. So he was like a TV producer with one of the Russian state-run networks that instead of, he said this brilliant thing I loved. He said, the new Russia realized that the fatal flaw in the old Soviet TV system was being boring. So it's still state-run, it's still propaganda, but they're not boring anymore.
Well, I mean, that's your first step to keeping people's attention, I suppose.
Right. So he does a little vignette where he talks about producing TV under state-controlled Russia, and then he does a vignette where he talks about prostitutes and what their life is like, and then he does a little vignette about this gangster that wants to be a film producer and how he got wrapped up into all these things because of his role as like this Western consultant and telling the stories of what Russia is like now. It was published in the year 2014, so it's not that old, but it's...
Yeah, but it's radically different than what it would be if he wrote it this year.
Yeah, and I can't wholeheartedly recommend it, but it is interesting. I listen to it in chunks, and then I've had enough, and I'll turn on something else for a while.
You're just describing that. Like, if I imagined myself as a job of, like, trying to say, like, oh, you do these things because this is what's right and what's going to make you money from a business perspective, and the person across the table from me goes, so this is how we exploit the people then? Whoa.
Yes.
Whoa. Hang on a second.
Have you read the book?
That is not what I'm imagining, though, from you can think about the different perspectives of both sides. Like, somebody that's been a higher up working in the Soviet Union is going to have a very different mindset than some capitalists from the West.
It's just like that. And it's like he gives them a little bit of advice, and then he thinks that they're going to take it, and they kind of do, but then something completely different than what he told them to do happens, and they keep paying him and keeping him around. And he's like, what am I even doing here? So he gave this little vignette where he went to this provincial government headquarters where everything was woefully out of date. There was secretaries writing things on typewriters, and people were calling each other on like old style telephones. And he was like, we need to computerize this office. And they're like, okay, what do we need? And he gave them this list of materials, and they bought them. And when they ordered, the invoice came, and he never found the computers. They basically sold them on the black market, and the office stayed the way that it was.
Nice. Oh. I mean, this is that vignette right there. Like, just this is why people need to travel. This is why, as an American, you need to go and see how other cultures work. Like, because you can't make this up, and it doesn't really sink in the way that you think it will when you actually see it happening in front of you. Like,
what we need around here is some computers. So, like, computers, great, buy them. I bet
people in America talk about corruption in the government, and it's true, there is. But it's not like open, blatant, ridiculous corruption that exists in other places in the world.
Anyway, I'll let you know when I'm done if I recommend that one, but I don't really.
It sounds interesting.
Okay, for our main segment today, Josh, you're kind of humoring me in something I want to do, but this could potentially be a little bit painful for me. And I'm going to give a big caveat before you get into your thing. And that is, I have kind of agreed that I'm going to be willing to let my guard down. And when I say let my guard down, I have a tendency that I've built up over an entire lifetime. Some of it's dogmatic and has been put on me by outside institutions. Some of it is self-defense mechanisms, but it is my facade of optimism, looking on the bright side, seeing things the good way and stuff like that. I'm going to try to drop all that for a minute and just give you some straight answers to some questions. And the reason I want to do this is we're going to talk a little bit about religion and Christianity and faith and stuff like that. And I feel like sometimes you recognize that I'm a smart person and you trust me and you believe my opinion. But when it comes to talking about religion, you don't trust me and you don't believe me because you feel like I shift into dogma mode and I'm not rational anymore.
That's a fair assessment. And
okay,
so here's my half of this caveat is it's going to sound like I'm confrontational because that's just the way that I communicate things that I don't understand. And so all the questions that I'm going to ask, and if I press you on specific topics, it's not coming from a place of like, you're dumb and I'm smart and I need you to understand this. It's a place of, I know you, I respect you. Why do you think something so radically different that doesn't make sense to me? Okay. And if I was a better person, I would be able to cage all of these with no emotion and make them logical discussions, but I can't and I'm not. And so they're going to come out as if I'm like badgering you or as if I'm trying to press you for a point. And I don't mean it that way. And I'm apologizing listeners in advance.
Josh and I's affection for each other is everlasting and will not be challenged by this discussion. So if you feel a bit uncomfortable at times, we aren't.
Let's be clear. If I am at some point in the future, it's not going to be today, able to completely shatter your faith with pure logic, I will feel bad for having done that to you, but a little bit triumphant for having done it.
Okay, so where do we start? I told you what I want to start on, but I'm not going to force that on you.
So I wanted, at first, I wanted to kind of narrow the scope of the conversation a little bit, just to one specific aspect of your faith that is unique, I think, to the LDS Church. And then I have some primer questions, fully intending you to say something that takes me off on a ridiculous tangent for 45 minutes.
Okay, so fine.
My intention is about the mission specifically, like when you take young men and women and send them to these far off places to spread the word.
Can I give some context?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, young men and young women are invited to serve as full-time missionaries. It's a very well-known thing, so well-known that Matt Parker and Trey Stone created a musical that became a hit smash musical on Broadway. People know this. We've got young people roaming around with name tags on, looking a bit out of touch with reality. The function of it is that they expect you to give up 2 years of your life, 24/7, 365, be with another person, and be full-time proselyting person seeking to convert other people to this church.
So, and we've talked before. We have an episode where I asked you specific questions about your missionary service that you served. Now, not only have you served in your mission, and you constantly talk about how it was such a positive influence on your life, maybe a bit of hindsight bias, maybe a bit of, repressing.
Self-defense.
My gut feeling is that there are some bad stories there that were repressed, and I'm gonna try to poke you for those ones. But also through the lens of the fact that you've now had 2 adult children that went through the same process, and so you have perspective on the other side, being the parent and sending your child and all of this. And so,
okay,
the first like broad category that I want to talk about is the internal culture of the LDS faith surrounding the idea of a mission. The way that you have portrayed this to me and just the things that you say and the things that I've seen, there is a very strong bias or pressure almost, like culturally, for young men and sometimes young women, we'll get to that too, to serve a mission. And so,
yes,
tell me a little bit about that. Like, as you're growing up in this faith as a young man, and you as I imagine, I'm just contemplating here, as you're starting to get to that age, there's probably this like subconscious pressure that intensifies for you to give up 2 years of your life to go do this thing.
Absolutely. No doubt, Josh, and your assumption there was completely correct. There is a whole cultural machine surrounding this. You're teaching your children from the time they're old enough to understand words that when you turn 18 years of age or 19 years of age, you're going to do this thing. You don't present it in a negative way. You just present it like it's the next step in your life. And there's a tremendous amount of cultural pressure that is independent of the faith. Like, no one will tell you that if you don't serve a mission, that you aren't a follower of Christ, that you don't believe in him, that you're not following God's will for you. But man, will you get ostracized in the community if you don't? And we say we don't do this, but there's no avoiding it. You go or you're considered less than. And if you don't make it, you're branded a failure.
And so let's talk about that for a bit. Like because as a Christian faith, like, Jesus was classically very accepting of people and their flaws. So how can, like, you can say that, like, logically you can understand this person is not less because they didn't do this thing that we expected them to do, but it still translates, like you're talking about, into actions, into biases, into ostracism. And so how do you reconcile those two things?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple of things that are kind of painful. One is that my second son didn't finish his missionary service. He came home early, and he faced a bit of this bias. And first of all, okay, I'm going to be deeply personal here. I don't even know if this is going to make the final cut of the podcast, but I had to struggle with my own feelings of disappointment about coming home early. I just didn't understand the circumstances surrounding why he stopped, and I had a lot of the feelings we're talking about. Like, I thought I'd raised him to be the kind of boy that would have the fortitude and the determination to make it through this, and he didn't. I don't know what he went through because he was in South America during COVID. Like, this was unprecedented. I've never experienced anything like this in my entire life. It was extremely stressful for him. He incurred some severe emotional wounds and came home wounded and still is suffering from a bit of that. Was the church complicit in this? I feel a little bit of animosity over it. So there was a conference in Texas a few months after he got back where they gathered all the parents of these missionaries that had come home under circumstances like this. Because what they were doing at the time was, instead of just releasing them, they're like, let's allow them to finish their 2 years of service in the local area by doing non-proselyting service duties. So my son had taken a job at a local shelter that provided goods to people on welfare that couldn't get diapers and feminine hygiene products. And he was working at that. And we went to this conference, and it was very clear that the policy of the church was that if you're a good missionary, you'll be a proselyting missionary. And if you're not a good missionary, then we'll make you a service missionary. There were no missionaries that were primarily service missionaries. And so they're up there at the pulpit. The leaders were talking to all these parents and stuff, and they were kind of talking about how you guys aren't any different. You aren't any worse. Do you have any questions? And I raised my hand, and I'm like, how can you expect us to believe that if you're not going to make service a primary option for serving missionaries? If you're going to then tell us with a straight face that we're not less than, that we're not.
If bureaucratically you're building service as the second tier down from what you expect it to be, how can you say that we're not the same as, or that we're the same as the primary?
And more so than any other time in my life, he got angry with me. He was standing in a pulpit, and there was a room with 200 people in it, and he pointed at me and told me that I was seeing it wrong. And I think someone behind him up on the stand, one of the other leaders, recognized that he was kind of getting out of control and stood up beside him. And this is uncommon in our church. Stood up behind him at the pulpit and tried to soften what he was saying and doing, because he recognized I had a legitimate question, and this guy just got mad at my question.
Well, it's not just a matter of your question. It's a matter of, like, the fact that you're asking it, that's your perception, and perception is reality. What you are communicating to me is this. Just because I'm not seeing it the way that you do doesn't mean my point of view is incorrect.
So have you ever thought of me as the kind of person that's sitting in a church meeting full of 200 people and raises my hand and challenges the leadership that's standing at the pulpit?
Yes, because you're that guy. You're the guy that asks the questions. Like, are there any questions? Everyone wants to go home. You're the guy that raises their hand.
Yeah.
But I'm because I do know the circumstances surrounding what happened with your second son on his mission, I can see you having, like, now, like you talked about, after you reconciled your feelings or whatever and got over it and started recognizing the struggle, you are going to empathize with your son. If we're stacking up priorities of loyalty between family and the church, I'm proud of you for then putting your son first before the church and having the willingness to stand up and challenge this person on that.
So here's the thing about what you were talking about, the cultural pressure to serve, and I'll bring it back to myself. And that is, I was aware of all this, but I wanted the reward at the end of it to come home having faithfully served the entire time and achieved it. And that kept me going. That kept me going through some really hard times. To give you a couple of... Go ahead.
I don't mean to cut you off or anything, but that's really interesting in of itself. Because of the culture that was built up around this thing, while you were there, what was getting you through was not, I'm here serving, I'm here like pushing out the word. It was, I want to get to the far end and reap the intangible rewards of having done this.
Yes, and it's considered a higher thing to not think of it that way, but then get the real reward out of the individual experiences, the lives you change, the people you serve, the lessons you learn, and those kinds of things. But in a macro level, you just think of it as like, I want to get to the other end of this. Think of it like Navy SEALs. You know, you go to Navy SEAL training and it's hard and people watch out, but the guys that make it through, they're like, they think of themselves as like this brotherhood of elite guys that did something other people weren't strong enough to do.
So what you're talking about now is people find it within themselves to get through extraordinary circumstances, and everybody's motivation to get there is going to be different. I had the same struggle when I was going through basic training at the academy. 6 weeks of just nightmarish treatment at the hands of not trained professionals, but older students,
amateurs
that were just passing on the hazing rituals that they had learned during their basic training.
Yeah,
and like it was hard. Dude, it was hard. Like I'm a big guy, and I have like this persona of being indestructible. But man, I cried myself to sleep the first few nights.
So we have a buzzword for this. We call it a returned missionary, and it's become its own thing. Like, for instance, they say to young girls, you want to grow up and marry a returned missionary, don't you?
Ooh, just phrasing the question that way.
It gets summed down as RM. So you talk about someone as an RM, and RM means that they did the thing.
So regardless, and that right there speaks to, regardless of what that guy said in that room, regardless of what the motivation is supposed to be organizationally and faithfully, the fact that you are creating tangible real world benefits for somebody that has done this thing, the fact that
culturally it's a rite of passage.
And is that correct? Like, I get the idea.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And if you corner a member of the church and you ask them this in a pointed way that points out the inherent logical flaws here, they would deny it. They would say, no, that's not what we do. We don't treat people differently because they're returned missionaries. But it's culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah. And I guess that's what I'm trying to challenge you on, like this, because there's the ideals, and that was the previous episode. Is you're putting forth, this is what the ideal of the mission is supposed to be.
Yeah,
and all the good.
And that's what I'm not doing now.
No, right, and that's because I suspected, like, what is the reality? Because we can talk about ideals all day long, but the reality is always going to be different. It's always going to be not as pristine and ideal. And so this is what I'm poking at as I'm trying to dig into
this cultural. Macro isn't unique to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We do it anywhere where we need someone to do something hard. I mean, think of like sending bomber pilots to go fly missions over Europe, and you tell them after 20 missions you can go home. And they aren't trying to think about the good that each mission's doing for the overall conflict. They're just trying to get to 20.
When I was going through basic training, what pushed me through those 6 weeks, and for a lesser extent the rest of my first year there, because it was horrible, was not the idea that I wasn't counting down. Because like, I'll just get to the other end and I want the tangible benefits on the other end. What was pushing me forward was the thought that I have never failed anything in my life, and I refuse to go home and face my family and tell them I couldn't hack it.
That perfectly describes what most missionaries feel when they get out on their mission and start to experience fear, doubt, loneliness, frustration, boredom, all of those things that might dissuade you to do it. What keeps you going is like, I don't want to go home and have to face my family as a failure. Well,
but here now, this is perfect. This is a great lead into the next part of the conversation, because I suffered emotionally. Like, I only have 3 kinds of nightmares as an adult, and one of them is being back at that place. And so I have suffered real world psychological trauma for having pushed myself through this thing, not because I wanted to achieve, but because I was afraid of failure because of the culture that I had grown up in. And so it sounds like that exact thing is happening. Like, do you have nightmares of things that happen to you on your mission? Like, were you personally psychologically scarred because you felt like you couldn't quit because of the impediments, I don't know if that word's right, because of the push that they were experiencing because of the culture?
Yes. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One was at one point during my mission, I was suffering dental pain, and I went to see a dentist, and he said, basically, I had been so stressed out that in my sleep I was grinding my teeth so hard that I'd done several decades worth of damage to the surfaces of my teeth in a very short amount of time. And to this day, I still have dentists look at my teeth and say, "What happened to you?" And I'm pretty sure it was just the stress of being a missionary.
Wow. Okay. So now that you experienced that stress and you found it and dug it within yourself to push through, but then now flash forward however many years, you have a son that was in the same circumstances, and he decided that he had met his threshold and that there's no cultural element that is going to prevent me from tapping out because this is just too much. And so the idea is that you want to create an environment, I'm projecting now, but you would want to create an environment for your children where they feel safe doing that. Where if things get too much for you, seek help. That is the right thing. But culturally, you're experiencing negative consequences.
So here's the razor's edge I'm riding on. I'm hearing him say the kinds of keywords that are indicating exactly what you said, that he's had enough and he's trying to tap out. But there's a lot of lore in my church, even from one of the past presidents of the church, he who became the president of the church, he told the story in general conference where he was on his mission, was frustrated, was tired, was feeling discouraged, and wanted to come home. And he wrote a letter to his dad, and his dad wrote back to him and said, "Son, stop thinking about yourself so much and get to work." And he did it and became the president of the church. And there's this ethic of like, you want to get out of something tough if there's an option to do it, but if you stick with it, you're going to be proud of yourself, and it's going to lead you to bigger and better things. And that's seductive, Josh.
No, I listen. You're preaching to the choir on this one, because that I think, again, I've mentioned this before. I think that's a generational thing. We wear our emotional scars with pride and be like, yeah, look at this emotional trauma that I pushed myself through. Doesn't that make me a stronger, better person? I think that's the story we want to tell ourselves, because looking back, I say this all the time. I'm very glad that I went to the academy, but I would never do it again. Knowing completely, fully everything that encompassed, the opportunities that I had because of that, I would not choose to do it again because it was so damaging at the time. And so how can we inflict that on young kids and just expect them to bear the scars and push through like we did?
There's this overriding ethic, like you said, that feels generational, where we're like, well, we need to force them through difficult things to build up the resistance and resilience and strength that comes from going through hard things. I think we can agree that going through hard things has the potential to do that.
Well, it's there's a quote from a book. I don't remember what it was, but it's the sword can be grateful for the fire that forged it, but it will never look back on it fondly. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. But here's the unspoken thing, though. Our generation, that's just what we did. Is like you sucked it up and you went through and you bore it because that was the expectation. I feel like, though, we're moving on as a culture and being a little bit better than that, because there is a bell curve. And at the bottom end of this bell curve are the people that have the psychological scars that sucked it up and just went through. But the tail end of this bell curve that we didn't talk about when we were growing up is the people that committed suicide because it became too much and they felt that there was no other way out. Is there? I think, this is what I'm afraid of. Is you set up this circumstance where there's an enormous cultural push from both the organization, the bureaucracy, and the family to do a thing that is admittedly very stressful. Putting a kid in a strange place among strange people to do a strange thing that nobody appreciates for multiple years of their life. And then making them and pressuring them to go forward, even though they're saying, I can't do it. Like, there is going to be a percentage of kids that are experiencing this trauma and feel like there's no other way out.
That was a really accurate and fair way to describe that, Josh. Good job.
Thank you.
let me give you another external manifestation of my struggles. So one of the aspects of missionary service that I don't think has any kind of, well, it does have a little bit of a doctrinal foundation, but probably more for mechanical reasons. They require that you're assigned to another person and that you stay together all the time.
And that serves multiple purposes. One of them being, hey, please don't unalive yourself while you're in the church's care.
Yes. Yeah, it protects you from things like being suicidal, just all the kinds of things that could get young people into trouble. So they make you stay together. Well, the thing is, when you take a random group of 150 young men and you just kind of make a slightly informed decision from imperfect knowledge about who might be compatible with one another, occasionally, some of the time, a lot of the time, they're not going to be compatible. Are any two people ever compatible? So in the military, we talk where you just randomly assign to each other. In the military, we talk about the 4 phases of team building. You've heard this phrase, but I'll tell it for our listeners. It's forming, storming, norming, and performing. The church doesn't use this phrase, but I'm using it for this purpose. When you get two people together, the first thing they do is there's this little honeymoon period where they're kind of getting to know each other. And then once that period's over, there starts to be some friction as the things that they disagree on come to the forefront, and they either work it out or don't. And then they come up with rules and norms that work for them. And in the end, they work together because they know and respect each other's differences.
Yeah. And that's part of all this, right? Because theoretically, hopefully, with a random assortment of kids that you're slamming together, this is like college roommates when you first get away from home. Yeah. Because you're still in a strange environment. You're still trying to understand your purpose in the world. And oh, by the way, here's this random person that you also have to form like a strong social bond to and that you're required to lean on. And let's cross our fingers and hope they're a person that you can get along with.
So while you're being required to proselyte to strangers who don't want to talk to you, and you never get a holiday or a day off, and you wear a suit and tie all day every day, and you study scriptures every moment that you're awake, you can't go to the movies, you can't date, you can't call home, you can't do any of that stuff, and you're stuck with this other person. And some of the most stressful moments of my mission were the moments where I wasn't getting along with that person and didn't see a way out of it. And they really don't let you out of it. So there was twice on my mission I went AWOL.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Not AWOL like really AWOL, but just AWOL where I was so fed up with this other person that I separated from them, which isn't permitted.
I need to be by myself for a bit.
Yes. So one time we just got in a fight about which way to go home, and we separated. He didn't chase me and I didn't chase him, and we went different ways home. We were apart maybe a half hour. Is it technically breaking the mission rules? Yes. Was it probably a reasonable thing to do in that circumstances? Also, yes. This particular missionary and I, he wasn't problematic. He was a good guy. We just had a legitimate difference of opinion, and I like him and I respect him, and yeah, that was the easy kind. The worst kind would be...
That's the Ben Rich talking. And before you move on, who got home first?
He did. I took my time. I wanted to be alone for a little while. I think I was madder than he was, and he wanted to obey the rules more. The other time, this was an interesting thing, when we went to the basic training, basically missionary basic training, I had one companion. I didn't really care for the guy, but in my group, in my district, kind of like a squadron, there was 12 of us, and all 12 of us were going to different places in the world except for me and this one other guy. We were both going to Oregon. And the basic training portion's short. It's like 4 weeks. And I thought, I can deal with him for 4 weeks. We're in class most of the time anyway. I don't got to talk to him, and we're sleeping the rest of the time and eating breakfast. So I just didn't like the guy. I just didn't like the guy. It wasn't personal. And then that sounded like an oxymoron, but
when you don't like somebody, it is personal, but it's not personal on them. It's personal on you. Like our inputs and outputs don't line up, dude. I just don't like you.
So the way that in my particular mission, the way the mission president handled changes in pairings and locations is he would bring all the people that he'd identified as potentially changing all together to a central location. And then once he had you all in the room, he would announce your new location and your new companion. You would stand up, move to the other part of the room, and sit next to that person. So everybody from all over Oregon comes to one place. He announces a switch. Everybody switches, and then you go back out to new places.
Okay.
With new people. And so I went in for one transfer, and he announced that I would be paired up again with the same guy I was with in basic training.
I don't like him. I was like, I can see the bureaucracy handling this one of two ways. Either, oh, well, let's see if we can accommodate and make some switches, or suck it up, Buttercup. This is the person you're assigned to do. You're supposed to be here for Jesus.
Yes. So I went to the mission president after the meeting. I'm like, President, I don't think you know, but I've been with this person before. And he had this moment of self-doubt, like, oh no, have I made a mistake? And then he switched modes and said, Elder Rich, I'm sure the Lord did this for a reason.
He's giving you just one more trial in your 2 years of the worst things that ever happened to you in your life.
I apologize for doing this. I'm going to switch to dogmatic Ben for a minute. Josh, this wasn't a bad guy. Like, me learning to get along with people I don't get along with is probably a good life lesson to learn. To just be more gracious and forgiving and thoughtful about someone I don't get along with is a good life lesson.
Let me be the practical side of that. On the other hand, on the other shoulder of Ben Rich, like speaking at him, is Josh in a devil costume saying, I'm already pushing 85% of my stress threshold. Why do we need to add another unnecessary 15% by being with somebody that we know we don't like?
That I'm already grinding the surfaces of my teeth off at night. So I'll give you one little vignette with him. We were, it was what's called our preparation day, where we're allowed to like do our laundry and grocery shopping and stuff like that. And we were in the parking lot, and he thought he was being cute and ran up and jumped on my back. Back then, I was 30 pounds lighter than I am now, and he was your size.
That's never acceptable.
And I immediately knew that it was him, and I executed a perfect judo throw.
Nice. Just
I
hip
reached
toss that
up
guy
over
into
my
the parking
shoulder.
lot. Yes.
Grabbed him by his shoulder and threw him over my shoulder onto his back in the parking lot.
Then I put my foot on his neck and sorry, I didn't realize it was you. Please don't sneak up on me again. Like, I'm so proud of you, Ben.
Yeah. There were other missionaries there, and they all did. It was like a record scratch moment where like I was the only one that was upset. Everyone thought they were having a fun moment. And like
that's the part where loudly you say, "Oh, I didn't realize it was you. Sorry, it was reflex." And then you grab his hand to pull him up, get in his ear, and go, "Don't ever touch me again."
Yeah, I just wasn't feeling it, and I wasn't feeling very humble, and I wasn't making the change. So one day we were having a disagreement about something. I don't remember what it was. We were both in the apartment together. You don't always have to be an eye shot of each other, but I made sure he couldn't see me, and I snuck out the door, and I went for a long walk. So long, in fact, that by the time I got back to the apartment, they'd already escalated and there were leadership there.
Yeah, the LDS authorities were there with the... What color flashing lights do they have on the cars? Is it blue and yellow?
So that was the second time I went AWOL.
That's hilarious. Did you experience any all right, so now I want to dig into this for a second. I want to know what the bureaucracy did to you for breaking the rules from your perspective were legitimate reasons.
Okay. I'll tell you what I think happened because I'll never know the truth. This is the same kind of thing I'm seeing happen with some of the people I work with right now. It is your president only has limited contact with you, and he has a process where, like, over the course of the 2 years, he needs to take the most junior missionaries, train them up to be mid-level missionaries, and make some of them senior-level missionaries who supervise the groups of other missionaries. And you're kind of on that track, and I was up until that point.
Okay. So it just it kicked you out of we're not going to want you for further service. Like, you put yourself on the naughty list.
I put myself on the naughty list, and I never recovered.
That seems to be a trend that you've maintained.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I didn't learn that lesson.
Can I shift your gears for a second?
Sure.
I'm going to ask you a very personal question. Feel free to cut this out if you don't want to answer it.
Go ahead.
So whenever we talk, through all of this social impetus and social cultural pressure, it has been very clear. You have made it very clear, at least to me in the things that you say and do, that it is an expectation in your household that your male children will serve a mission when they turn 19. I have asked you this before in private, but never in public. That same expectation does not exist for your female children. Is there anything, or I know females in the LDS faith are allowed to serve missions. I think they have to be a little bit older now. But
I'll give you a straight answer, and maybe a more candid answer than you're expecting here.
Okay.
Early in my life, there was a very, just like we talked about last time when we reviewed Invisible Women, how there was a very 1950s returning from the war kind of ethic where the woman is at home taking care of the family and the home, and the man is at work working. This ethic just translated right into missionary service. There's theological reasons for it, but I'll just put that aside for a second. So men are expected to do this. This is their duty from God. Women can help if they want.
Okay.
That was the ethic of this in the church. It is transformed over my lifetime. One recent change that kind of shows the shift is men went when they're 19 and women used to have to wait till they're 21. And there was just a significant amount less that went because it's very disruptive to try to go like during your junior year in college.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so just a lot less women went. But when they lowered the age for men, they also lowered it for women. And a significant percent of women, there was this huge shift in the demographics of how many were serving. I think it's a good, greater portion. Have we completely changed? No. How did I have that influence the culture in my house?
That's what I'm asking, because you gave me a very dogmatic, bureaucratic answer. I'm asking you specifically because you personally have not expressed to me that there's an expectation for service from your female children.
I've kind of towed the party line on this one, that I've told my 3 sons that this is their priesthood duty and that their mother and I will help them and support them, but we expect them to do this when they turn 18 years of age. The girls, I say, you can do it if you want. So I've kind of just towed the party line on this one.
How has your son's experience, your second son's experience with the mission impacted your expectation of your male children and or the expectation of your female children?
So my third son is going to be age to go next summer after he graduates from high school. He's given me all the signs that voluntarily he intends to go and wants to go. And I don't have any reason to second guess him on that. I don't know. I'd call him in the room and be like, so you're telling me you want to go, but are you really sure?
Hey, so I know that I've been setting the expectation, and culturally we've been telling you that this is something thou shalt do for the last 19 years. But are you sure that you actually want to do it? Like, you can totally tap out now with no repercussions whatsoever. Dude, of course he's going to say, yes, I want to go.
Right. So I don't know. I imagine, so my daughter that's between my second and third sons, she's past the age where she would go, and she's made it pretty clear she does not intend to go, nor will she ever. My youngest 2 daughters, I imagine one or both of them may choose to go. We'll support them if they want to. I don't know. It just felt like I had too much momentum in the family culture to make that big of a shift. And I don't think there's
to start requiring them, you mean? To like come to the dinner table one night and be like, you know what? You're going.
Yeah, there just wasn't the theological impetus to do that, and so we hadn't made the change in our family culture.
Okay. I imagine you've talked to them about it, though, if they've wanted to go. Probably not the same conversation that your sons get, but have you spoken to your younger female children about
it? No, not recently, no. But you're planting the seed. We had that discussion with my older daughter and didn't go like I expected, and then I just kind of felt like now I don't know if I did the right thing in that situation.
Have you ever asked your kids that aren't at the age yet, but are approaching it, like your third son, have you ever asked them their opinions on this, what their feelings are, what do they think about it, what is the pressures, are you feeling pressure to do this?
Gosh, it's so hard to do something like this in the context of growing up in the church and not also feel like I'm putting a lot of expectation on them. But from time to time, I'll just do the litmus test thing. Be like, hey, I know we haven't talked about this in a while. Are you still thinking about serving a mission?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost impossible for you as the authority figure, especially
to ask a question about this that doesn't come loaded with expectations.
Yeah, I get that. Do your best, I suppose, but over communicating is better than under communicating.
So when my second son came home, his mom and I really had a long talk. We were like, hey, this is hard for us as it is for him. But we want to make him feel loved and accepted and understood. And we did the best that we could. Was I perfectly understanding and not transmitting any degree of disappointment or anything like that? No, of course not.
How is this going to impact the way that you treat your third son if he goes on his mission? And like either way, if he decides that he needs to come home early, or if he completes it, now you have 2 sons that have and 1 that didn't. Like that's going to alter the relationship. Completely
outside the context of the church, you get the idea of like in a family with a lot of kids, the first kid took most of the beatings.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. I learned a few lessons. I would probably handle it differently the second time.
Okay. I have another question for you. This one is we're getting off the emotional subject. You mentioned to me before that you have to financially support your child when they go off on the mission, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's subsidized heavily by the church, but yes, it's self-funded.
But you have to fund it, and this is no small amount of money. I assume it's in the thousands of dollars.
It is in the thousands of dollars, but not in the tens of thousands.
Okay. Now, put that requirement into context with the knowledge that the church has billions of excess funds lying around accruing millions of dollars of interest a year.
I can't do this without sounding dogmatic about it.
So, but I'm not asking for the dogma. I'm asking your personal, like, how does that make you feel that the church not only is tithing you, which fine, we talked about tithing before, you do you, but like you and your kids are sacrificing this time in their life, this very formative time in their life, and the church is asking you to fit the bill, and you know for a fact that they're sitting on a Scrooge McDuck money bin back there in Provo or wherever they are.
Yeah, you talk about that like I ever consider that, but I almost never do. To me, this thing, it could be anything, but just an opportunity to make a personal self-sacrifice and do something meaningful is worth it. Like,
is worth the money that they're asking you to put out, even though they could fully fund it with no issues.
Yes.
So how is this not gatekeeping then for low-income families that are part of the LDS faith that want to serve missions and can't afford it?
That's a good question. So people contribute to a fund that basically is like a scholarship fund for those kind of people. Sometimes their local congregations help, those kinds of things. But
listeners,
I get it.
Listeners, I hope you can hear me shaking my head and rolling my eyes.
Let me see if I can finish your thought. Why do people have to give more to do this when the church could just foot the bill? Yeah, okay, fine. You're right, Josh.
Well, so here's the thing, Ben. I went to the Air Force Academy and suffered emotional scars from it, but it was 100% cost-free to me. I was being paid by the military while I was there, and I was required to serve 5 years after I graduated. That was the exchange that we made. Now, it's like, oh, you are required culturally and dogmatically to serve the greater good for 2 years of your life in very stressful situations that you have no control over, and we're going to need you to pay for it too. Like, at what point is it just asking too much?
It's presented like this badge of honor. Like, not only are you choosing to give up your life, but you're also making the sacrifices that are required to fund it. That's
the cultural answer to a question that can't be answered objectively. This is why when you're in the military, they keep talking about esprit de corps and you're doing this great thing and you're sacrificing when your life sucks, because that's the only thing they have to give you.
Yes, I'm trying hard not to get dogmatic about this again, but I think there is objective value to making personal sacrifices for a cause, whatever it is. Like all those things that you said you suffered through in basic training, it changed you, and you couldn't have had those changes without the pain.
I get that, and again, I'm happy that I did it, but I wouldn't do it again. But again, I didn't have to pay to go suffer this emotional trauma.
But paying is a kind of sacrifice, and suffering emotional trauma is a kind of sacrifice, and they aren't fungible. They aren't both different flavors of the same thing. They're different things.
Here's the thing: is like I would understand like the church subsidizes a portion of it, and you have to pay part of the bill. In absence of the knowledge that the church is more than capable of fitting the entire bill and still having ludicrous funds left over after the fact. That's where this is. I'm not going down this road anymore. Everybody knows my stance on the fact.
There's one more thing I want to say about it. I wonder what would happen, because you can see this kind of thing. Like if you remove, I'll try to think of a metaphor. I know you don't like metaphors for this kind of thing, but like when you take a tree that's strong in a group of other trees and you put it by itself and the wind blows it over. Like if the church, let's say they announce tomorrow that they're going to foot the entire bill for the entire missionary program, would that make us have more missionaries or less? Would they be stronger or would they be weaker?
Would there be opportunities for people that otherwise wouldn't be able to do it? Now they get to?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think this is very cultural in of our time. Like Jesus, when he sent out the apostles, told them to go and to not have jobs and to go without taking any money with them.
While I understand the teachings of Jesus, Jesus grew up in a very different cultural time, in a very different economic situation than we are in. Like back then, having 3 chickens was a lifestyle. Like that was you could just live your life happily with a litter of children because you had 3 chickens. Like it's a little different now, Ben. Let's shift gears a little bit. Tell me the worst thing that happened to you that was because of somebody else while you were on your mission. And I'm not phrasing this question very well. You were required to evangelize and put out the good word. People don't like being told the truth from a different perspective. What's the worst thing that you experienced because you were trying to put something in front of somebody that they didn't want to hear?
Okay, I get why you go to this question. I'm going to tell you why there's an incorrect assumption in it, and I'm going to answer it. So I think it's been proven psychologically, like the kind of things that are the most damaging to people psychologically is when there's like a person that you love and trust that does something that's a betrayal. And the category of things you're describing doesn't fall in that category. It's like if a stranger yells at me because I'm a symbol that represents something that they disagree with, it almost feels like a badge of honor. Like I got persecuted for Christ's sake. The New Testament talks about that. We like high five each other about it later. Like if someone throws a big gulp at me out their window, which happened, if someone yelled at me, if someone threatened me on the porch, if someone sicked their dog at me, I'm describing things that actually happened. None of that's what made me grind my teeth at night.
Okay. So the worst things then that happened to you were inflicted on you by either the bureaucracy or the roommate that you were with, like by the trusted source that you were supposed to have be comforted by.
Yeah, that's the external stuff. Then there's the internal turmoil, which we haven't gotten to yet, but I'm willing to.
Okay. What was the internal turmoil then? That's
okay. I'm gonna get ultra personal here, more so than I think I ever have in the history of Bad at Magic. We'll see if this makes the final cut.
We're going to have to keep recording for like 45 more minutes in order to make sure we have enough content that doesn't get cut.
There's a great degree of stigma, not stigma. There's a great degree of pressure surrounding adherence to what the church calls the law of chastity, not having sex before you're married.
Okay.
Like any teenage boy, I think I just got horny right on schedule, was attracted to others and stuff like that, but I was trying to live by the church, but I was messing up. I was looking at porn occasionally, which is against the teachings of the church, but I was always looking forward to my mission. Like, okay, I'm kind of screwing up at home when I have some freedom and no one watching over my shoulder, but once I'm a missionary, then I'll be able to clean up this thing in my life that I've been struggling with and I really like to get out of my life. And so I went.
Oh no, and you went and you realized you're just a person. Oh no.
So I went into my mission with this expectation that I was going to be able to live this higher level of understanding. And in a lot of respects, all the mechanical things surrounding a missionary made it virtually impossible to mess up in this respect. You're not dating. You don't go any place that you shouldn't be alone. You don't have access to media. At least at that time you didn't. It was just very, very tight. But there was a few opportunities that came up on my mission and I just fell off the wagon. I remember one time in this apartment where we shared with two other missionaries. So it was me and my companion and another companion, their mission. We had different geographic areas, but we shared a residence for money's sake. And one time in the mail, like a Sears catalog or something arrived and had like 3 pages of bra ads in it.
That's the most PG-13 thing I've heard in a long
time, buddy. Josh, just stick with me here. So I saw this thing and it all fell on me like a ton of bricks. Like I hadn't looked at anything like this in 10 months, and I really wanted to look at it, and I knew I shouldn't, and I knew they were going to discourage it, and I knew it was a problem, and I just wanted to look at it anyway. So I sat in the closet and I closed the door and I was looking at this thing with like a flashlight. It's a really shameful moment for someone like this. I can tell you're giving me a great degree of grace just by the look on your face, and thank you for that. But I feel like the Latter-day Saints listening are judging me. So finally, Elder Hofer knocks on the door and he's like, "Elder Rich, what are you looking at in there?" I said, "Bra ads."
Wow.
And I never lived it down. And I threw it out after that, and that wasn't even the worst one.
That
was it.
Dude, like that's okay. Now what we're talking about is the culture of shame. Okay.
Yes.
And the
way.
Okay.
Good. We've shifted gears into a kind of different area.
Yeah. This is. I feel like as an outsider, a lot of mainstream Christianity-based religions have weaponized shame as a tool to enforce behavior. And because you are a 19-year-old kid experiencing hormone surges that lead to the natural reproductive things that are required to propagate the species, I don't think you should suffer psychologically and culturally because of that.
So none of them like reported me to the mission president. I didn't get blackballed. It was just kind of this, it was relatively lighthearted in that group. And okay, these are the things, Josh. I got chased by dogs. I got yelled at by strangers. I got things thrown at me. I got threatened. I had people stand me up on appointments and ignore me and take things from me and disrespect me. And none of that bothered me. But these things, like, I thought I was going to be able to transform my life and be a better person. And I was realizing that it wasn't going to be as easy as I thought, and that my struggles were not that easy to get away from. Those are the things that tortured me.
So I can understand and I can sympathize with the desire to change, and from your own perspective falling short of your own goals. That I can understand. What I disagree with, obviously, is the content matter, because this like, I think you and I have had this conversation 1,000 times.
Yeah, I know. I wonder what this would look like. What would this look like if this stigma didn't exist? Like, I can't even think of the mechanics of how this would work.
Just accepting and understanding the separation of the biology from the spiritual.
Okay, so I see this in the military sometimes. I came here to the Middle East in 2006, and you did too. And at the time, we were serving under what was called GO 1D or GO 1A, General Order 1. And the rules of General Order 1 were to prevent incidents from happening surrounding a few things that generally tend to have incidents happen. This is very similar to the mission rules. Like, in the past, these kind of situations have led to these bad things, which are really disruptive to good order and discipline and the accomplishment of the mission. So I, as the commander, am outlawing consumption of alcohol, men and women being in the same room at the same time, and I forget. But those are like...
those are the ones everybody remembers. It's no booze and no sex.
Yeah, so those things happening in the military are very similar to the way it's happening on a mission. Like, hey, we get a bunch of young guys out here, and if we just let them do these kinds of things, that would, one, undermine what it is they're trying to do, and two, be a tremendous distraction and potentially catastrophic. So we're going to build a bunch of rules around all of that stuff to protect you from not doing that.
I agree with the presumption, like, this is the mission, and these things are counter to the mission. However, the key difference that you're missing here is that in the military, there is no culture of shame surrounding the natural reproductive urges that men and women have. And
yeah, but you probably saw people who violated that get schwacked.
No, I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is that while, yeah, everybody knows you're not allowed to have sex, like the tent of the army grunts that was next to the bee hut that I lived in had like almost a take one, leave one porn library, like right behind the flap of their tent. Like,
right, and the rules about, like, if the sheet's down around the bed, don't bother the guy.
Right, exactly. It's this, yeah, it's a private thing, but it's not a shameful thing. That's the difference.
Military shame is different. It exists. It's just different.
Oh yeah, it's just for different reasons. It's like, what do you mean you're on a PT waiver for the run? Yeah, no, I get that. What we're talking about is, because I've seen you struggle with this for so long, and like, I hate that you're feeling these negative feelings for something that is, like I said, PG-13 at worst in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
My roommate at the academy was proud of the fact that he had a collection of almost every Hustler magazine that had been published since like 1980 something, like completely sorted chronologically, like in his overhead bin, and he was allowed to have that. It wasn't a bad thing. I don't know, man. This whole aspect of it just drives me nuts. But
all right,
I can sympathize with
channels.
I can sympathize with you wanting to be different and having expectations that were destroyed. That I can get on board with.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that made me grind my teeth, not getting chased by dogs.
So let's shift gears again. Now, you had the experience as a mission, and you've come on this podcast and mentioned and talked about it in ways that you are proud of yourself for having served. And you feel great pride in having that RM at the end of your name when you hand out your church business cards, or is that on your name tag in the church uniforms? Yeah. Never mind, we don't have to go with
that. So yes, but I'm more cognizant than I've ever been that I would be careful about saying that in mixed company so that I wouldn't shame someone that maybe had chosen not to or had come home early without making them feel bad about themselves.
Right, and so this is kind of the transition that I was making, is that, again, you now have multiple experiences with this, with children that haven't gone, children that have gone and completed it, and a child that has gone and didn't complete. So how does that change your perspective on the entire system of the idea of the mission in general?
So the kind of things I'm about to say to you, you're going to think is nothing, but it is kind of me departing a bit. there are a lot of things that they have us do in missionary service that aren't at all effectual or useful. They're just things you give 19-year-old boys to do to keep them busy and out of trouble.
Okay.
They're tedious, they're boring, they're frustrating, they're difficult, and it's just a waste of their time. Like 99.9% of the activities they have you do are just really ineffectual. And you're supposed to find a fulfillment in it if you're doing it right.
Can you give me an example?
Tracting. Tracting is the name that we use for going door to door and knocking on people's doors and asking them if they want to learn about Jesus. It is very, very ineffective. It's just a way to fill the time when otherwise you wouldn't have anything to do.
Okay, that's a good one. I was expecting you to say something like stacking chairs at church or something, but no, that's
I don't mind stacking chairs. That's easy. They're not having us like, okay, now take it and move it back to the other side of the room and keep doing it. No, it's not that time wasting. And everyone has a good tracting story where they found someone's house that was struggling through some time in life and didn't know what to do, and then the missionaries knocked on their door and then they found Jesus. Like, it's what's supposed to keep you going.
That happened to you, right?
Yeah, maybe once or twice. But I knocked on thousands of doors, Josh, and most of the time it was just frustrating and horrible.
I've never had an elder come to my door and try to prophesize to me. But before I talked a lot about it with you, I would have just kicked them off my property. But now, having spoken to you, I'm going to invite them in. I'm going to give them Gatorade and water. And I'm going to say, chill out in the air conditioning for a few minutes, get cooled off. If you say one word to me about Jesus, I'm kicking you out of my house.
Yeah. There's another temptation that you have on a mission. This one's more subtle and less affront to the rules, and that is the fact that you wear a uniform everywhere you go, where you're wearing a white shirt and tie and a black name tag, kind of sets you apart, and it makes you obvious to people what you are, but it also makes it really hard for you to ditch out of the duties. There's nowhere you can go where you aren't going to stand out like a sore thumb.
People that are looking for it, you have all of the indicative markers. Like, they know what you're supposed to be doing.
Right, exactly. So it's but occasionally you'll find some place you can go and not be doing what you're supposed to be doing. And it's a really big temptation when you're just tired and frustrated and lonely and you want to just not do it for a little while. Okay. And there was probably about twice on my mission where I just had like a hangout cave. There was a member of the church that wasn't real, super enthused about everything, and just, hey, anytime you want to come over, you guys can sit there and play video games all day.
That's nice, just to have that. Like, from their perspective, they're just offering you an escape from this stress and
the rigors of, yes.
But from your perspective, it's this horrible temptation, and this is backsliding from the duties and the mission, and ugh.
I had a couple of places like that and spent a few, more than I should have time there. I felt better when I just picked myself up and said, yeah, let's not do that today. It was easiest when I got with a companion that was also, I don't know, when I had really good, strong companions, we never did that kind of thing. And sometimes when I didn't, I would pull the weight and pull my share, but sometimes I'd just be like, yeah, I'm sick of dealing with this guy that doesn't want to do this. Let's just go play video games.
This is what happens when you're married for a long time and you both look at each other. What do you want to have for dinner? And both of you are like, we should make something with the food that we purchased from the grocery store, but I don't want to be the one that says I want pizza.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, just like that. But
okay,
so missionary.
Is the mission valuable? Like, is this such a pillar and a tenet of the faith that this is critical mission stuff that the missionaries do when they go out?
I had someone I admire say to me, serve faithfully and well every day of your mission and enjoy it for the rest of your life. And while it cost me the grinding surfaces of my teeth and more than a bit of stomach lining, 2 years of my life and, $8,000, I don't think a day goes by where I don't benefit from the lessons I learned doing that.
Okay. But that's not what I was asking. From the church's perspective as an organization, is sending missions out, is that a critical thing that they want to do? Is it a pillar of the religion itself?
Yeah, for probably 3 different reasons. One is it's just a good developmental step for turning young people into lifelong members.
So not so much as an evangelical process, but more as an indoctrination development process.
Exactly. They send some people to areas where they have virtually zero success in converting people. Like I had a friend that went to Greece and they averaged like less than one person for the entire mission getting baptized every year. But just the struggle of the young people kind of foments their souls in a way that turns them into good lifelong members. And that's one aspect of it. That's one thing the church gets out of it.
So this just, your comments there have just completely altered my perspective of what the mission is supposed to be. This isn't you trying to grow the religion. This isn't you actually going out evangelicalizing. This is you creating a core, diehard, zealous base of believers in this.
Yeah,
and
I'll agree with that.
So
analysis.
Many questions, man. Oh, jeez.
So, over time, as you've seen, at least in America, the amount of devotion to religion is starting to go down, and it's happening the same. Even though there's the same amount of missionaries serving, the number of convert baptisms is going down. And the church isn't alarmed about this because that's only one of the goals, is converting people to the faith. The other is just building young people into strong members.
It's LDS boot camp. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Okay. Then why? If you're not like, if the tangible benefits are coming out and like all you're doing is trying to separate like the core devout, like ultra zealous people from just the regular churchgoers, why have these tiers of membership built into something that's supposed to be all inclusive, and it's supposed to be for everyone to try to find the right spiritual thing?
Yeah. I can't answer that without preaching a whole bunch of doctrine. I don't know how to answer.
I'm not asking this whole thing. I'm not asking you for doctrine.
It's a healthy organization that's kind of been resilient in showing that it can withstand the test of time and growing. Did they always do things right? No. I sent you a video this week of a day in the office of one of the leaders.
Don't do this. Don't do this, because you sent me this video and it's like 3 minutes long of a day in the life of one of the senior members of the church, and Ben, like, it was so glaring, and I sent back, my number one comment was, I watched this guy talk to multiple people, go to multiple meetings, and I didn't see not one female and not one person that wasn't white in that whole video. Yeah. He went to a meeting for the people that were in charge of the Middle East and North Africa, and it was a room of old white guys. Ben, dude, come on.
I can't even remember what I said to you in my text when you asked me that question. I think something to the effect of like the default male in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is from Utah.
Yeah, and then you sent me an org chart of all the people that are in charge of the church to like a certain level, and there was 3 black guys on it.
There was more than 3.
No, there was 3 black guys and
you counted it?
And like 50 white dudes. Like, you can pull up that picture.
I don't believe you.
If you want.
I don't believe you. There was more than 3. Are you sure?
There was
actually counted?
There was 6 women, and they were specifically in charge of things that the church has said are women's work. Dude, yeah. It's not great. Like, you need some diversity in this org chart that you sent me.
There had to be more than 3 black guys. I gotta look at it now.
Ben, if you come back at me and say, "Oh no, there's 5." Listeners, there are 70 people on this list, okay? It's a picture of 70 different people. And if Ben wants to argue with me that I said 3 instead of 5, like, he's got no leg to stand on.
Okay, it's only 3. All right. Well, we're being candid today.
Okay, we don't have to talk about the complete and utter disgusting lack of diversity in the church. That's fine. I get it. It's the fact that there are 3 black guys. Honestly, I'm seeing that as progress. Let me ask you another personal question. Again, I'm not asking the dogma. I'm asking Ben Rich this one. Okay.
Wait, I got to say one thing about that.
Okay.
The organization changes by attrition, not by election. But now go ahead.
Okay, that's fair. So it's going to take a couple of generations for all the old white guys to die off. Okay. So Ben Rich, not Return Mission Ben Rich, but Ben Rich, the person. Why is it that whenever we talk, despite all of the shortcomings, you are willing to give all of your H of G to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and almost 0 H of G to any government organization that you have ever interacted with?
I love this. I'm glad you asked me this question. because I feel that you give the same degree of dogmatic loyalty to this ideal of some kind of functional, puristic bureaucracy that is based on rock solid procedures and rules that will administer justice and equity fairly and create a utopia. And I think that's just as implausible as the idea of God.
Interesting.
Maybe more so.
Okay. But then a lot of things that we're talking about is the difference between the ideal and then the reality. Because while I'll go ahead and I'll extend to you the idea that, yes, I have a lot more faith in a bureaucracy than I do in an organized religion, I will also admit openly that there are serious flaws in the current iteration of the bureaucracy and that there are changes that need to be made. And I don't think I hope I've never been quoted on this podcast as saying no, like even if it's not perfect, the government is the right answer and the current iteration of the government is correct. I don't think I've ever been on record of saying that.
No, and I'm not accusing you of saying that.
Right.
But I do think that you believe that there is some way to, through the right system of elections and the right Bill of Rights and the right processes of developing laws to somehow reach this utopian state. And I don't believe that's possible.
Well, if nothing else, I want it to be like I believe that the government. I don't know why I'm defending my position, but I want to. I believe more that a government of elected officials, where people, regardless of how little say they get, they do have some say in how it is run. Obviously, it's flawed and broken in half a dozen ways, but there is potential for it to do the thing that it says it's going to do. Whereas the fundamental tenet of a religion is always going to be in faith-based assumptions that don't have backing. Like at the bottom of the hierarchy, you dig down all the way to the roots of the core of the beliefs and why we do the things that we do. It's built on assumptions and faith that can't be answered objectively. And that's where it all falls apart for me.
I get that. And I could see that if that was the only thing I had, that it would definitely be worthy of your doubt. Let me reverse the question a little bit.
Okay.
I've been part of bureaucratic organizations with elected officials and good intentioned people, and seeing how inefficiently it can run and how problematic it can be because of a little bit of corruption that can come from people with power and those kinds of things. I've been a part of the Church of Jesus Christ, my Latter-day Saints, my whole life, and those are good people. Like they're really well-intentioned people trying to do the right things for the right reasons, and they do a lot of good stuff. And I trust that group of people. And I've associated with people from that church all over the world, and everywhere I go, they are kind and good people.
I am trying very hard to reconcile what you just said, because I believe that they are good people. But the things that you believe, from my perspective, can be objectively bad or objectively backwards steps in cultural society. And honestly, I think that might be a good place to kind of end this, is you recognizing and at least just communicating to me in a way that makes sense that you personally do have some difficulties, like maybe not with everything, but there are some things in the church that aren't jiving with your personal beliefs or whatever. And honestly, whether you push back or not, that's me being unfair to you. Like, you're allowed to have whatever beliefs you want, and if I don't want to be a hypocrite, then that's great. We draw our lines differently. That doesn't change the amount of respect that we have for each other. And again, I said at the beginning, if it sounded like I was being very combative, it's because I want. Like, I know you and I respect you, and you're not going to change that, but I just want to understand better where you are and where you're coming from. So I will stop.
That means something to me. Thank you.
I will stop grilling you on this topic. Listeners, let us know. Like, I'm not going to steal Ben's thing, but like, this is one of those episodes where if you want us to talk about stuff like this again, like, even though like it made me and Ben slightly uncomfortable, both of us, me asking these probing questions that I know he doesn't want to answer and him responding in very personal ways. So let us know if this is something you liked and that we should do more, or if it's something that you absolutely hated and we should never do again.
And if you feel like you have something to add, or you want to share your thoughts about these kinds of things, you can join in the discussion. You can go on our subreddit and post there, or go on our Facebook page. I'll post some links about things that we talked about there and in the show notes, and you can join in any way you like.
If you like what we do, consider sharing us with a friend. If you like us, maybe your friends will like us too. If you really want to show some love, consider taking your phone out of your pocket and giving us a good review on the podcast player of your choice. We get so much visibility from that, and thank you if you already have. And if you want me to be the shadow to Ben's light from now until the end of time, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.